Quarter 4 test 2 review, sections 9.1 and 9.5. Your first section within your review actually goes over 9.2. So we are solving these equations by completing the square. For number 1, we're given x squared plus 4x is equal to 5. Our constant is already on its own side, so we are going to identify b, which is 4. Do b over 2 squared, so that's going to be 4 over 2 squared, which is 2 squared, and that is 4. The 4 we're going to add to both the 5 and the x squared plus 4x. So this is going to be x squared plus 4x plus 4 is equal to 5 plus 4. We are going to factor the left side and add the right side. So this is going to be x plus 2 squared is equal to 9. Then take the square root of both sides. So x plus 2 is equal to plus or minus 3. I'm going to separate this into two equations, so I have x plus 2 is equal to negative 3, as well as x plus 2 is equal to positive 3, and solve for x for each. By doing this, I'm just going to subtract 2 from each side, and we get x is equal to negative 5, and x is equal to 1. For 2, we are given x squared minus 2x is equal to 8. So again, our constant's on its own side. So we're just going to identify the b, which is negative 2. Do b over 2 squared. That's going to be negative 2 over 2 squared, which is negative 1 squared, and that is 1. We're going to add the 1 to both sides of this equation, so we get x squared minus 2x plus 1 is equal to 8 plus 1. So we're going to factor the left, add the right. This is going to be x minus 1 squared is equal to 9. Take the square root of both sides. We get x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus 3. So x minus 1 is equal to negative 3, and x minus 1 is equal to positive 3. We are going to add that 1 to each side of both of these equations to get that x is equal to negative 2, and x is equal to 4. For number 3, we have x squared minus 10x is equal to negative 25. Again, our constant's on its own side. Our b is the negative 10, so we're going to do negative 10 over 2 squared, which gives us negative 5 squared, which is 25. We're going to add the 25 to both sides. So we have x squared minus 10x plus 25 is equal to negative 25 plus 25. From here, factor the left side. We're going to have x minus 5 squared. Add the right side. It's equal to 0. So this is going to be taking the square root of both sides. So x minus 5 is equal to 0, because 0 is neither positive nor negative. So we're just going to add the 5 to both sides and get that x is equal to 5. For 4, we are given x squared plus 2x is equal to 15. Our b is the 2, so we're going to do 2 over 2 squared, which is 1 squared, which is 1. The 1 gets added to the 15 and the x squared, plus 2x plus 1 is equal to 15 plus 1. Factor the left side. It's going to be x plus 1 squared. Add the right side. That's 16. We're going to take the square root of both sides, so we get x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus 4. We separate this into two equations to where we have x plus 1 is equal to negative 4, and x plus 1 is equal to positive 4. We're going to subtract the 1 from each side, so we have x is equal to negative 5, and x is equal to 3. For 5, we have x squared minus 10x is equal to 24, so our b is that negative 10. So negative 10 over 2 squared is going to be negative 5 squared, which is 25. And we're going to add the 25 to the 24 and the x squared minus 10x to get x squared minus 10x plus 25 is equal to 24 plus 25. So this is going to factor out to be x minus 5 squared and add to be 49. We're going to take the square root of both sides. We have x minus 5 is equal to plus or minus 7. Separate this into two equations, so x minus 5 is equal to negative 7. X minus 5 is equal to positive 7. We're going to add the 5 to both sides. We get x is equal to negative 2, and x is equal to 12. For 6, we're given x squared plus 4x is equal to 32. So again, our b is at 4. So 4 over 2 squared is equal to 2 squared, which is 4. We're going to add that to both sides. Get x squared plus 4x plus 4 is equal to 32 plus 4. So this is going to factor out to be x plus 2 squared is equal to 36. Take the square root of both sides. We get x plus 2 is equal to plus or minus 6. Separate into two equations. X plus 2 is equal to negative 6, and x plus 2 is equal to positive 6. Subtract the 2 from each side to get that x is equal to negative 8, and x is equal to 4. I'm sorry. Subtract the 2, x is equal to 4. For 7, we're given x squared minus 2x is equal to 1. So our b is that negative 2. So we're going to have negative 2 over 2 squared, which is negative 1 squared, which is 1. Add the 1 to both sides. So x squared minus 2x plus 1 is equal to 1 plus 1. Factor the left, add the right. That's x minus 1 squared is equal to 2. Take the square root of both sides. So x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 2. And then just add the 1 to both sides, and we get that x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 2. For 8, we're given x squared minus 6x is equal to negative 6. So that negative 6 is our b. We're going to do negative 6 over 2 squared. That gives us negative 3 squared, which is 9. So add the 9 to both sides. We get x squared minus 6x plus 9 is equal to negative 6 plus 9. This is going to factor out to be x minus 3 squared is equal to, add it, it's going to be 3. Take the square root of both sides. So x minus 3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 3. Then just add the 3 over. We get x is equal to 3 plus or minus the square root of 3. For 9, we have x squared minus 4x is equal to negative 1. Our b is the negative 4, so that's negative 4 over 2 squared. This is going to give us negative 2 squared is equal to 4. We're going to add the 4 to both sides. So x squared minus 4x plus 4 is equal to negative 1 plus 4. This is factoring out to be x minus 2 squared is equal to 3. Take the square root of both sides. X minus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 3. From here, just add the 2 to both sides, and we get that x is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 3. For 10, we have 2x squared minus 4x is equal to 8. So for this one, we're going to divide everything by the coefficient of that x squared, which is 2. We get x squared minus 2x is equal to 4. Now that our a is 1, we can solve by completing the square. Our b is negative 2, so it's negative 2 over 2 squared, which is negative 1 squared, which is 1. We're going to add it to both sides. We get x squared minus 2x plus 1 is equal to 4 plus 1. From here, factor. So x minus 1 squared, add, is equal to 5. Take the square root of both sides. x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 5. And then just add the 1 to both sides, and you get x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 5. For 11, we have x squared plus 4x is equal to negative 1. So that 4 we're going to divide by 2, and we're going to square it. So that's 2 squared, which is 4. We're going to add the 4 to both sides. We get x squared plus 4x plus 4 is equal to negative 1 plus 4. From here, we're going to have x plus 2 squared is equal to 3. Take the square root of both sides, so we have x plus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 3. And then just subtract the 2 from each side to get that x is equal to negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 3. For 12, we have 3x squared minus 12x is equal to 3. So we're going to divide everything by that 3 to get x squared minus 4x is equal to 1. Our b is negative 4. So we're going to have b over 2 squared, which is negative 4 over 2 squared. That gives us negative 2 squared, which is 4. We're going to add that to both sides and get x squared minus 4x plus 4 is equal to 1 plus 4. Factor the left side, x minus 2 squared. Add the right side, it's 5. Take the square root of both sides, so x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 5. From here, add the 2 to both sides, so x is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 5. Oops. For 13, we have 3x squared minus 6x is equal to 21. So we're going to do the same thing, divide everything by that 3. So this is going to leave us with x squared minus 2x is equal to 7. Our b is negative 2, so negative 2 over 2 squared is negative 1 squared, which is 1. We add it to both sides, so we have x squared minus 2x plus 1 is equal to 7 plus 1. Add the right side, factor the left, so x minus 1 squared is equal to 8. We're going to take the square root of both sides, so we have x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus 2 square root 2. Then from here, just add the 1 to both sides. We don't have like terms, so this is going to stay 1 plus or minus 2 square root 2. For 14, we are given 3x squared minus 12x is equal to 69. So we are going to divide everything by this 3 and get x squared minus 4x is equal to 23. We then have a b of negative 4, so that's negative 4 over 2 squared, which is negative 2 squared, and that is 4. So we're going to add this 4 to both sides of the equation to get x squared minus 4x plus 4 is equal to 23 plus 4. So from here, we are going to factor the left side to have x minus 2 squared. Add the right side to get 27. Take the square root of both sides, so x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 3 square root 3. From here, we're going to add the 2 to both sides and just have x is equal to 2 plus or minus 3 square root 3. For 15, we have 5x squared minus 50x is equal to negative 85. So we're going to divide everything by this 5. To get x squared minus 10x is equal to a negative. 5 goes into 8 once with 3 left over, so 5 goes into 35 7 times. Our b is the negative 10, so that's negative 10 over 2 squared, which is negative 5 squared, which is 25. We're going to add the 25 to both sides, so we get x squared minus 10x plus 25 is equal to negative 17 plus 25. So we're going to factor the left side, add the right side. when we do this, we are going to have x minus 5 squared is equal to 25 minus 17 gives us 8. So take the square root of both sides. We have x minus 5 is equal to plus or minus 2 square root 2. Then we're going to add the 5 to both sides, and we get that x is equal to 5 plus or minus 2 square root 2. For 9(1), we are solving by taking the square root. So we are going to be moving everything over in order to get x squared by itself. So for this example, we have x squared minus 25 is equal to 0. So we're going to add the 25 to both sides. So this is going to give us x squared is equal to 25. We take the square root of both sides, and we have that x is equal to plus or minus 5. For 2, we have x squared plus 25 is equal to 0, so we're going to subtract the 25 from each side. We get x squared is equal to negative 25. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. However, we cannot take the square root of a negative, so this one is no solution. For 3, we have 6x squared minus 6 is equal to 0. So we're going to add this 6 to both sides. Then we have 6x squared is equal to 6. Then we divide each side by the 6. So x squared is equal to 1. We take the square root of both sides, and x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1. I'm sorry, the square root of 1 is 1, so it's just plus or minus 1. For 4, we have negative 3x squared plus 27 is equal to 0. So we're going to subtract the 27 from each side. We get negative 3x squared is equal to negative 27. Then we divide each side by the negative 3. So x squared is equal to 9. And we take the square root of both sides, so x is equal to plus or minus 3. For 5, we have negative 2x squared minus 1 is equal to 0. So we're going to add this 1 to both sides. We get negative 2x squared is equal to 1. Then we divide each side by the negative 2. So we get x squared is equal to negative 1/2. We take the square root of both sides, and we get that x is not equal to anything because this is undefined. You can't take the square root of the negative. For 6, we have 4x squared minus 100 is equal to negative 100. So we're going to add 100 to both sides. We have 4x squared is equal to 0. We divide each side by the 4. We get x squared is equal to 0. Then we take the square root of both sides, so x is just 0. And we got to remember 0 is neither positive nor negative, which is why that plus or minus does not go in front of it. For 7, we're given x squared minus 121 is equal to 0, so we're going to add the 121 to both sides. So x squared is equal to 121. We take the square root of both sides, and x is equal to plus or minus 11. 8, we have x squared minus 49 is equal to 0. So add the 49 to both sides. We're left with x squared is equal to 49. Then take the square root of both sides. So x is equal to plus or minus 7. For 9, we have x squared minus 16 is equal to 26. So we're going to add the 16 to both sides. We have x squared is equal to 36. We take the square root of both sides, and x is equal to plus or minus 6. For 10, we have x plus 5 squared minus 6 is equal to 43. So we first want to move this 6 over by adding it to both sides. So we have x plus 5 squared is equal to 49. Then we take the square root of both sides, so x plus 5 is equal to plus or minus 7. This is going to turn into x plus 5 is equal to negative 7, and x plus 5 is equal to positive 7. So we're going to moving the 5 over by subtracting it to get x is equal to negative 12, and x is equal to 2. For 11, we have x minus 1 squared minus 19 is equal to 81. So we're going to add the 19 to both sides. We get x minus 1 squared is equal to 100. So we're going to take the square root of both sides and get x minus 1 is equal to plus or minus 10. So we're going to add 1 to both sides. So it's going to give us x is equal to 1 minus 10, and x is equal to 1 plus 10. So x is equal to negative 9, and x is equal to 11. For 12, we have x minus 14 squared plus 13 is equal to 14. So we're going to move the 13 over by subtracting it from each side. So x minus 14 squared is equal to 1. We take the square root of both sides. So x minus 14 is equal to plus or minus 1. So then we're going to add the 14 to both sides. So this is giving us x is equal to 14 minus 1, and x is equal to 14 plus 1. So x is equal to 13, and x is equal to 15. For 13, we have 2 times x minus 3 squared plus 1 is equal to 73. So we want to undo the addition or subtraction first. So we're going to subtract 1 from each side first to get 2 times x minus 3 squared is equal to 72. Then we're going to divide each side by the 2 to get x minus 3 squared is equal to 46. We are going to take the square root of both sides. This is 36, not 46, I'm sorry. So take the 36, take the square root of both sides. So x minus 3 is equal to plus or minus 6. And again, we're going to move the 3 over by adding it to both sides, which means we're going to have x is equal to 3 minus 6, and x is equal to 3 plus 6. So this is giving us x is equal to negative 3, and x is equal to 9. For 14, we have x minus 1 squared plus 15 is equal to 14. So we're going to subtract the 15 from each side. We have x minus 1 squared is equal to negative 1. We take the square root of both sides. We cannot take the square root of the negative, so this is no solution. For 15, we have negative 2 times x plus 1 squared minus 5 is equal to negative 55. We're going to add the 5 to both sides. So this is going to be negative 2 times x plus 1 squared is equal to negative 50. We divide each side by the negative 2. We have x plus 1 squared is equal to 25. Take the square root of both sides. So x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus 5. We're going to subtract the 1 from each side. We get x is equal to negative 1 minus 5, and x minus 1, or x is equal to negative 1 plus 5. So this is giving us solutions of x is equal to negative 6, and x is equal to 4. For 16, we have 2 times x plus 1 squared minus 1 is equal to 9. So we're going to add the 1 to both sides. We get 2 times x plus 1 squared is equal to 10. We divide each side by the 2. So x plus 1 squared is equal to 5. We take the square root of both sides. So x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 5. And then we just subtract the 1 from each side to get that x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 5. For 12, we have 2 times x minus 3 squared plus 7 is equal to 19. So subtract the 7 from each side. We have 2 times x minus 3 squared is equal to 12. We divide each side by the 2, and we get x minus 3 squared is equal to 6. We take the square root of both sides, so x minus 3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 6. And then we move the 3 over by adding it to both sides to get x is equal to 3 plus or minus the square root of 6. For 8, we have 5 times x minus 7 squared plus 10 is equal to 25. So we're going to subtract the 10 from each side. We get 5 times x minus 7 squared is equal to 15. We divide each side by the 5. We have x minus 7 squared is equal to 3. Take the square root of both sides. X minus 7 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 3. Add the 7. We have x is equal to 7 plus or minus the square root of 3. For our next part, we are completing these or solving using our quadratic formula. So for number 1, we have x squared plus x is equal to 12. So for this one, we are going to move the 12 over by subtracting it from each side. We have x squared minus x minus 12 is equal to 0. So our a is 1, our b is negative 1, and our c is negative 12. So we are going to have x is equal to negative times negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 12 all over 2 times 1. These two negatives turn into positives, so we have x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared is 1. The negative 4 times negative 12 is a positive 48 all over 2. Underneath that radical, that 1 in the 48 is a 49, so this is going to be x is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 49 all over 2. This simplifies to be 7 underneath that radical, so x is equal to 1 plus or minus 7 over 2. So this is 1 minus 7 over 2 and 1 plus 7 over 2. So 1 minus 7 gives us a negative 6 over 2. 1 plus 7 gives us an 8 over 2. So x is equal to negative 3 and x is equal to 4. For 2, we have 4x squared minus 17x minus 15 is equal to 0. So our a is 4, our b is negative 17, and our c is negative 15. So this is going to give us x is equal to a negative times negative 17 plus or minus the square root of negative 17 squared minus 4 times negative 15 all over 2 times 4. So this is going to give us a positive 17 plus or minus the square root of 17 squared is 289 minus 4 times 4 is 16 times negative 15 is a positive 240 all over 8. So this is going to be x is equal to 17 plus or minus the square root of 289 plus 240 gives us 529. The square root of 529 all over 8. The square root of 529 is 23, so this simplifies to be x is equal to 17 plus or minus 23 all over 8. So we're going to separate this into 2. We have x is equal to 17 minus 23 over 8, as well as 17 plus 23 all over 8. The 17 minus 23 gives us a negative 6 over 8. And the 17 plus 23 is 40 over 8. So if we simplify both of these, we're going to have x is equal to negative 3/4, and x is equal to 5. For 3, we have 2x squared minus 5x is equal to 3. So we're going to subtract that 3 from each side to give us 2x squared minus 5x minus 3 is equal to 0. So our a is 2, our b is negative 5, and our c is negative 3. Plugging this into our quadratic formula, we're going to have x is equal to a negative times negative 5, plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared, minus 4 times 2 times negative 3, all over 2 times 2. So these two negatives are going to turn to be positives. So x is equal to a positive 5, plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared is 25. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8, times negative 3 is a positive 24, all over 4. So x is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root of 49 over 4. The square root of 49 is 7, so x is equal to 5 plus or minus 7 over 4. This simplifies to be x is equal to 5 minus 7 over 4, as well as x is equal to 5 plus 7 over 4. So x is equal to negative 2 over 4, and x is equal to 12 over 4, which means that x is negative 1/2, as well as 3. For 4, we are given 3x squared plus 11x plus 5 is equal to 0. So our a is 3, our b is 11, and our c is 5. So for these, we are going to have x is equal to negative 11 plus or minus the square root of 11 squared minus 4 times 3 times 5 all over 2 times 3. So x is equal to negative 11 plus or minus the square root of 121 minus 4 times 3 is 12 times 5 is 60 all over 6. The 121 minus 60 is 61, so x is equal to negative 11 plus or minus the square root of 61 all over 6. You cannot take the square root of 61, so this is your final answer. For 5, we have x squared minus 11x plus 28 is equal to 0. So our a is 1, our b is negative 11, and our c is 28. So this is going to give us x is equal to negative times negative 11 plus or minus the square root of negative 11 squared minus 4 times 1 times 28 all over 2 times 1. So x is equal to positive 11 plus or minus the square root of 121 minus the 4 times the 28 gives us 112 all over 2. Next, we're going to have x is equal to 11 plus or minus the square root of 121 minus 112 gives us 9 all over 2. The square root of 9 is 3, so x is equal to 11 plus or minus 3 over 2. This is going to turn into two equations to where x is equal to 11 minus 3 over 2, and x is equal to 11 plus 3 over 2. So 11 minus 3 gives us 7. So that's x is equal, not 7, 8, to 8 over 2, and x is equal to 14 over 2. So x is 4 and 7. For 6, we have x squared minus 49 is equal to 0. So our a is 1. Our b, we don't have 1, so that's 0. And our c is negative 49. If we plug this into our quadratic formula, we're going to have x is equal to negative 0 plus or minus the square root of 0 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 49 all over 2 times 1. So this is x is equal to the 0. We don't need to have, just keep the plus or minus. The square root of 0 squared is 0. The negative 4 times negative 49 is a positive. 4 times 49 is 196, I'm sorry. 196 all over 2. The square root of 196 gives us 14. So this is x is equal to plus or minus 14 over 2. So it's going to give us a negative 7 and a positive 7. For 7, we have 6x squared plus x minus 1 is equal to 0. So our a is 6, our b is 1, and our c is negative 1. So this is x is equal to a negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 1 all over 2 times 6. So simplifying this, we're going to have x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 plus 24 all over 12. So x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 25 over 12. This is simplifying to be x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus 5 over 12. So x is equal to negative 1 minus 5 over 12, and x is equal to negative 1 plus 5 over 12. So this is going to be negative 6 over 12, as well as 4 over 12. So x is equal to negative 1/2, and x is equal to 1/3. For 8, we have x squared plus 8x minus 20 is equal to 0. So for this one, we are going to have an a of 1, a b of 8, and a c of negative 20. So this is going to be x is equal to negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 20 all over 2 times 1. So x is equal to negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 plus 80 all over 2. So x is equal to negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 80 plus 64 is 144 all over 2. So this is going to be x is equal to negative 8 plus or minus 12 over 2. So x is equal to negative 8 minus 12 over 2, and x is equal to negative 8 plus 12 over 2. So x is equal to negative 20 over 2, and x is equal to 4 over 2. So we have solutions here of negative 10 and 2. For the rest from these sections, we are finding the number of solutions here. So for 9, we have an a of 1, a b of 0, and a c of 25. We are just using b squared minus 4 times a times c to find this. So remember with these, with your answers, if your number is a positive, then you have 2 real solutions. If it's a negative, there's two imaginary solutions, and then if it's 0, it's just one real solution. So plugging these values in, we're going to have 0 squared minus 4 times 1 times 25. So this is going to be 0 minus 100, which is negative 100. So this is two imaginary solutions. For number 10, we have an a of 3, a b of negative square root 7, and a c of negative 3. So plugging these into b squared minus 4 times a times c is going to be negative square root 7 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 3. So the negative square root 7 times negative square root 7 is just 7. The negative 4 times 3 is negative 12, times negative 3 is a positive 36. 36 plus 7 is 43. So this is a positive number. We're going to have two real solutions. For 11, we have x squared plus 8x plus 16 is equal to 0. So our a is 1, our b is 8, and our c is 16. Plugging these in, we're going to have 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times 16. The 8 squared is 64. The 4 times 1 is 4, times 16 is 64, so that's 64 minus 64, which is 0. So this is just one real solution. For 9(5), we are solving using the best method that we think is possible. So for 1, we have 4x squared is equal to 64. How I would solve this was just dividing each side by the 4 to get the x squared by itself. So x squared would equal 16. And then I would take the square root of both sides, so x is equal to plus or minus 4. For 2, we're given 4 times x minus 3 squared is equal to 25. So I'd start by dividing each side by that 4 and get x minus 3 squared is equal to 25 over 4. I'm going to keep this in this form because when I go to take the square root of both sides, I'm going to be able to take the 4, so I won't have to rationalize the denominator. So it's the next thing I'm doing is taking the square root of both sides, so I get x minus 3 is equal to plus or minus 5 over 2. I'm going to separate this into two equations, and when I do so, I'm going to have x minus 3 is equal to negative 5 over 2, and x minus 3 is equal to positive 5 over 2. So with me, I want to change the 3 into a fraction that has 2 as the denominator, so it's easy for me to move the 3 over. So I'm going to have x minus 6 over 2 is equal to negative 5 over 2, and x minus 6 over 2 is equal to positive 5 over 2. So I'm adding the 6 over 2 to both sides to get x by itself, and I get that x is equal to positive 1/2, and x is equal to 11 over 2. For 3, we have x squared minus 3x minus 28 is equal to 0. My factors of negative 28 that add up to be negative 3 are 4 and negative 7. So I'm going to solve this by factoring it. So I'm going to have x plus 4 times x minus 7 is equal to 0. I'm going to set both of these parentheses equal to 0, so I have x plus 4 is equal to 0, and x minus 7 is equal to 0. And I'm just going to move the 4 over by subtracting it from each side. And I get x is equal to negative 4. Add the 7 on both sides to solve for the other, and we get that x is 7. So x is negative 4 and 7 for this one. For 4, we have x squared minus x is equal to 6. With this one, I want to move the 6 over, so I'm going to subtract it from each side to get x squared minus x minus 6 is equal to 0. My factors of 6 are 2 and negative 3 that add up to be that negative 1. So I'm going to factor this one also to have x plus 2 times x minus 3 is equal to 0. I set both of these parentheses equal to 0, and I solve. So I'm going to subtract the 2 from each side to get x is equal to negative 2, and add the 3 to each side to get x is equal to 3. For 5, we have 2x squared minus 4x minus 3 is equal to 0. I'm going to use my quadratic formula. So a is 2, b is negative 4, and c is negative 3. So x is equal to a negative times negative 4, plus or minus the square root of negative 4 squared, minus 4 times 2 times negative 3, all over 2 times 2. So this is going to simplify to be a positive 4, plus or minus the square root of 16, plus the 4 times 2 is 8, times 3 is 24, all over 4. The 16 plus 24 is 40, so we're going to have x is equal to 4, plus or minus the square root of 40, all over 4. So x is equal to 4 plus or minus 2 square root 10 over 4. The 4 becomes a 2, the 2 becomes a 1. So x is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 10 over 2. For 6, we have x squared plus 10x minus 3 is equal to 0. So I'm going to use my quadratic formula again. I have that a is 1, b is 10, and c is negative 3. So x is equal to a negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 10 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 3 all over 2 times 1. So x is equal to negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 100 minus 4 times 8 is negative, 4 times 2 is negative 8, times negative 3 is a positive 24 all over 4. From here, we're going to have x is equal to negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 124 all over 4. That 124 is 4 and 31. The 4 is 2 and 2. So x is equal to negative 10 plus or minus 2 square root 31 all over 4. I'm going to simplify these by dividing them by 2, so that's negative 5, 1, and 2. So x is equal to negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 31 all over 2. For our next one, we have 1.5x squared minus 4.3x is equal to negative 1.2. We are going to multiply this entire thing by 10 to get rid of these decimals to make our lives a little bit easier. So we would have 15x squared minus 43x is equal to 12. So I'm going to move the 12 over by subtracting it from each side. So I have 15x squared minus 43x minus 12 is equal to 0. And I'm going to use my quadratic formula. So a is 15, b is 43, c is negative 12. So x is equal to negative 43 negative times negative 43 plus or minus the square root of negative 43 squared minus 4 times 15 times negative 12 all over 2 times 15. So this is going to be a positive 43 plus or minus the square root of 43 squared is 1849 minus, this is going to be a plus because negative 4 times negative 12 is a positive 48 times 15 gives us 720 all over 30. Now if we add the 1849 and the 720, we are going to be left with 2569. So x is equal to 43 plus or minus the square root of 2569 all over 30. We cannot simplify this any further, so this will be our answer. For 8, we have x squared minus 1/4 is equal to 0. So we're going to add the 1/4 to both sides. And I'm going to have x squared is equal to 1/4. I then take the square root of both sides, so x is equal to plus or minus 1/2.